Hi, and welcome to Network AF. Today, we're talking with Hank Kilmer. Hank has run major internet backbones since the early 90s. He got into networking in the late 80s in college. We're going to talk today about both technology and people. The technology, what's been the same over the last decades as the networks and internet has grown, and some of the differences that are good, some of them that are bad. And we're also going to talk about people, what has been helpful to him in his career, what they try to do at Cogent to bring people in, and what we maybe as a community could do better to open up networking and help people get in. Thanks, and look forward to having you on the episode. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Network AF. I'm here with my friend and fellow networker, Hank Kilmer. Hank, can you tell us a little bit about yourself personally and professionally?
Sure. Been doing networking since 1986 when I got into it. So, you know, I'm younger than I look, I guess, but needed a way to pay for college. So ended up getting involved back then, running networks and writing device drivers and everything else to make it all work back in the researchy days. Been doing it ever since. Didn't really view it as a career at the time because didn't know it would be a career. But it's been a fun ride. It's been kind of crazy.
Awesome. And you're in the greater DC, Virginia area?
I live in Maryland. So yeah, just outside of DC. I've been born and raised in Maryland. The school I went to was Rutgers, so that was Jersey. So all East Coast. Lots of travel for the job, but otherwise all here.
I've actually done SMDS peering back when Alex Latsko was at Rutgers. We did peering because I was at Philly, and we convinced Bell to moosh the lattice together. You know, it was technically tariffed that they could. So that was a little funny. So yeah, I was in Ashburn to hug our servers and upgrade from the Soup 723 BXL and the CEO cab a 3 weeks ago. And I just kept driving around, and I expected to see 3 times the number of data centers as 2 years ago, but I saw like 8 times. I just done like an IR map of that area. And I remember.
Yeah. And think of the power draw out there. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, gigawatts. And I remember when Bob Gibson from Case took me to the secret mysteries of May East at Gallows. And I saw like
in the parking garage.
In the parking garage. I think it was maybe when you were still at UUNet, and there was like this UUNet router on a 2-prong extension cord plugged in. Meanwhile, I was reading this like, oh, the NSA has all the secret taps on the internet, and I'm looking at the internet. Like I'm there, I'm looking at the 5 routers, and it's like the internet, and there's no taps. I'm like, okay.
There are no taps. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'll tell you that those kind of rumors all still exist.
Yeah.
And it's still, I mean, it's much more distributed, it's bigger, but it's still the same thing, you know?
I mean, we can talk about, we'll get to this. I've gotten to people that are like, oh, you know, provider X, does this, sells their net flow. It's like, well, I happen to know provider X doesn't do anything with their net flow, or is just starting to like, so unless there's, unless Cisco is the Huawei, which I think we'd see that in, in the networking, it doesn't work. So you mentioned getting into networking. When I showed up at Temple University later than you, so I guess it was actually 87. 1 year.
Yeah, I was going to say,
2 years.
Yeah, right.
2 years later, I remember I went in, and there was a professor who did computer image processing, and a professor did networking, and I was like, image processing, AI, oh, that's really interesting. Oh yeah, networking. And then, I actually wound up being friendly with both of them, but I found the T1, the PrepNet access, and I did wind up, getting into that. So
for me, it was I needed a job. So I was looking for anything, and really just kind of got lucky. I was there for electrical engineering. I eventually switched to computer science. My degree's in computer science, but I just needed a job, and they were building a new building, and they were running some networking in there. This was freshman orientation week, and I saw them trying to get it so that these computers would talk and print, and I could tell they were struggling.
Was this like thicknet and bridges and?
Oh yeah. Your taps that you have to
Yes.
dig in and tap, your vampire tap type stuff.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, all that. Yeah. And I could tell they were struggling, and so I just went in and offered to help. And they took a chance. They said, "All right, if you can get these computers to talk to each other and be able to print by the end of the day, I'll give you a job." So I sat down. I'd hardly been on a computer at that point, and I flipped open the manual, and I found that the way my brain works, it was pretty logical. It was pretty straightforward, and I got it by the end of the day, and they were true to their word, and I got a job. And the job was a mixture of running their networking on campuses, some getting more connectivity into the other universities and the ARPANET and that sort of thing, and some repairing of the hardware. We did. I took apart monitors, discharge flyback, capacitors and everything else, right?
General IT.
Yeah, general IT, but I very much enjoyed that diversity. We got a new for a Sun, I think it was a Sun 2 at the time. We got a new networking card that didn't have drivers, so I spent a couple of days writing device driver for that, and had to tweak some of the networking stack so it would deal with the
So how many
conditions.
protocols at the time? So it wasn't just TCP, it wasn't just IP.
No, it was a little
DECnet?
bit of everything. It was DECnet, VAX. We had the VAXs, we had Apollo's, HP Apollo domain, which was that one was crazy, because depending upon how you booted it was a totally different machine. Sun, we had a good mix of stuff. So it was
My college hack was informal. They wanted on the Apple, I think we had Apple laser printers that were hooked up and to LPD, but it was like $1 a page, but the mainframe laser printers were free. So that was the grand project. A few of us tried to figure out how to get the CDC cyber on the net with an LPD compatible protocol, so we could do our printouts, our laser printouts to it. The dot matrix, that was free, but so that was also, I guess now we'd say corporate. It was college networking, but IT, support, not just
I got, we got a connection up down the East Coast. I remember this was later in my college days. I was doing some research, and they were doing some of the same research at University of Delaware. Logged into one of their machines to look at some of their research to work on it. At the time, people are like, "What are you doing? Why? What do you do?" Well, I make it so you kind of didn't have a way to describe it. So I make it so computers can talk to each other. Okay, why? And you kind of get tired of giving examples like, okay, well, I'm doing this research, so are they, and we can compare data sets, right? That kind of went over so many people's heads. It just wasn't in their world, because we're in the 80s here. And so I would just kind of say, well, it's because I think it's cool, because it was just, it's so much easier. Just move on.
That's fair.
Right? Just move on.
Even 92. So I was copying where you were at the time. I went to Disclave in 92 or 91 or 92, and I saw the Digex banners, and they were like Sun 3s. And I'm like, oh, I have Sun 4s in my basement. I'd always wanted to run a multi-line BBS. Right. And I was thinking about how to explain the internet. And, that was what I did. I wrote a C program that looked like a BBS. And so you couldn't explain IRC. I couldn't explain IRC to people. It's like, it's a 2,000 line chat board. And like, oh, okay, I get it. But it's like a 900 line, but with your fingers.
Right.
And now we have OnlyFans. So, but yeah,
kind of crazy.
and then what happened was people could see there was enough interesting that they wanted a shell account, which was ultimately the goal, was to get them into it. But of course,
Yeah.
in 92, we didn't think people would have IP addresses at home. Like,
Well, right. Well,
like,
and
all
you
you need
know,
is a
so
terminal, right?
right after college, yeah, right. All you need is, and I had a little deck
8220.
terminal, you know, yeah, exactly. And
Yeah,
I thought it was the best thing. I still love that keyboard,
yeah.
but you know, I thought it was the best thing ever. You know,
Well, actually,
after
up
college,
near where you went to school, I had friends, Dave Chevette, I think his father taught up there too, or no, his father-in-law taught up there too, but he had a Unix PC at home. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. He had a
yeah, that's
terminal
cool.
in every bathroom. And I was telling Gail, like, we're going to be like that. She's like, who needs to be connected in the bathroom? I'm
Right,
like,
right,
wait,
right.
you will see.
You'll
I do,
see.
you know.
Somehow we'll get there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So how did that go from, did you take a special interest in the interconnectivity, or was it just general while you were at college, was it just general networking,
So
across?
it was very much general. It was a bit of sysadmin. It was a bit of programming. It was a bit of the networking, a bit of the hardware repair and rebuilding things.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a jack of all trades. When I got out of college, um, I got a job for a little bit as a sysadmin, which was fun,
Mhm.
for a software development house. So they also had kind of one of everything to port their software to all the different types of machines, which was a lot of fun. And then UUNet, I got the job at UUNet when they were, starting to try and do this alternate thing, right?
And so maybe
Um,
you could describe the internet at the time uh was NSFnet, was ANS ran CORE, the commercial. And so
yeah.
there's like Unet was the little dog at the time, right?
Well, yeah, it was, do we make this commercial at first, right? And you had, and kind of you had UNet and PSI sort of going, yeah, let's do this, right? You had the government controlled bits and go, yes, but we still want to control how you talk to us, right?
Mhm.
UUNet had its UUCP side of things, which was a store and forward,
You can
not
see my
a,
Telebit Trailblazer in the corner there, which is
yeah,
a UCP
yeah,
optimized modem. Yeah.
yeah, which was big and really, I mean, it was really cool. It was great at the time, but they're like, no, I think we can make this work. And so they started to hire people to help build out that side of it. And I was one of those early round folks with them. And so you're dealing with companies and people. It was really more you're dealing with individuals. Yes, they had
Mhm.
companies. Yes, they had a job, but you're talking to somebody on the phone who's going, yeah, I just wrote my own, PPP implementation or slip
Right.
implementation to get it so it could work over the telebit
Right.
in a dedicated manner. And so when you're trying to get them up and running and working, you're not only debugging the phone lines,
Right.
right? You're debugging,
The
their
modem, the serial
implementation.
port,
Yeah,
your device
yes,
driver,
yes,
your memory, end
yes,
to end. Yeah.
yes. Which is, I think, part of what at the time was, having come from a little bit of a jack of all trades, that helped me a lot
Mhm.
in those days. But also UUNet had a lot of really bright people there,
Oh
which
yeah.
helped me a lot too, right? Yeah. So it was a great job. It was a lot of fun.
So
It grew so fast.
at university, well, yeah, I mean, every 3 months it was like another era.
Yeah.
So like at university and UNet, you mentioned having to figure things out yourself. Really, I think a lot of companies still look for people to take the initiative and,
Yeah.
will beat their head against it until they get unconfused. But you mentioned people, did you have people that were real mentors about technology or how to work with people, which can be confusing when you're just entering the workforce, or,
Right. So at the university, I must admit, there were great people there. You mentioned one earlier, Alex,
Mhm.
and Rick Crispin, and there's just a nice list, Mel Pleasant, a nice list of really bright people that I kind of had my own little job to do in my own little world, and they would point in a direction, and then I would just run in that direction. So they were kind of the, they were the guides. I didn't use them at the time as I kind of learned at UUNet how to use a mentor, because I didn't really know how to use a mentor. Because to your point, it was, there's a lot going on when you're, a late teen or, sort of thing, getting into this stuff and figuring it out. But I would not have been successful without them either. But I didn't really know how to tap them the way I should have, right? Or the way I could have, right? And the way I learned later at UUNet, at UUNet, you would have what you would think would be the best idea in the world. And you would just walk down the hall talking about it. And by the time you got to the end, it would look so different because everyone was so bright. They could follow exactly what you're doing and give it their input and advice and improve. And, by the time you're at the end of the hall, you've got this much better idea, right?
It's interesting. And both of us are from the East Coast. It's something I think that we need to be intentional about, which is that there's, especially academia, people and people from the East Coast sometimes, not to overgeneralize, there's often the attitude that, of course you're good, you're here. Of course, and then, oh, of course, I like you, you're here, but I hate your idea. Let's talk about that. And that can be jarring for some people. And so I've seen companies try to be more intentional about that, not in the over validating, but just like reminding people that, whether it's the net effect, look at all our happy customers, look at the great product, we're all, without doing the everything is awesome. But that can also be, intimidating. I've seen, and it's something that networking should think about as we welcome people, to it.
I think our education system focuses on tasks and on more concrete knowledge, the soft skills of how to talk to somebody, how to know, I can criticize you and I can do it harshly and I can do it gently. And depending upon who you are, you may respond better to one version than the other.
And privately, please. Yes.
Well, sure.
Not public, yes.
but right. Well, criticize in private, praise in public, right? Sort of thing. But the point is how you talk with people, how you interact with them, matters. And it's actually arguably more important than what you know.
Yeah, my first non-consulting job, the CTO said, Avi, it's not sufficient to be correct. Like, it doesn't matter, right? Which is another way, sometimes the customer, sometimes it's okay for the customer to be wrong, which is another way of saying the world is not 0 and 1. It's not right and wrong. It's not, this is the technically best thing that may be true. That doesn't mean people should change what they're doing. Or it may not be true. It may just be a matter of opinion, your opinion.
Well, right. Well, but also fast forward, in my career, when I moved into management, I had an engineer who really wanted to try his idea out. I knew that it was not going to work the way he wanted it to, but I also knew that wasn't going to harm sort of the customer and product. And I tried to explain, for him to think about some of my the issues. But in the end, it was, okay, this is an area he wants to try. It's not going to hurt anything. Let him run with it, because that's the way he's going to learn the best. You have to let people make mistakes,
right? And
then be there to help them, and go, okay, now let's, now this is what happens, so let's learn from it and move on. And
when we do a follow-up on engineering management, we can talk about what the balance there is. But absolutely, I mean, it's the same thing. If you hear it, if you drive on autopilot, it's very different than making all the connections yourself, right? And we used to drive around. I used to drive around without a map and just like, oh my God, I didn't realize that was connected there. It is very different when you get to actually see it. So at UUNet, where did you have people that helped you with the way of communication and people, as well as technology?
Yes, very much so. Had mentors there in terms of both technology and being a team member and communicating and working with others, working with difficult customers, working with crazy employees as things grew. The gamut. UUNet was at a time where not only was the technology exploding, they were very good at selecting people to bring in that not only were really good at what they did, but fit into UUNet's culture, into UUNet's method. And part of that was getting a team that meshed. And as you mesh with people, and you instantly build a trust with them, and that gets you to listen better. Because again, I was still young, right? And learning how to work with people. But it was really good. And I think I was there maybe 2-3 weeks when I made an update to the router that ran in front of our firewall, and I locked us out of it.
Yes.
And so I walked into Rick Adams' office and I said, Rick, I'm doing a maintenance this weekend on our main router. And he kind of looked at me and said, why? Because I locked us out. I made a mistake and locked us out, and I'm going to fix it and recover this weekend. And he gets this nice little grin on his face, and he's like, okay, that sounds good. Go do, right? Sort of thing. But he lets you, and he respected, I didn't hide it. I didn't, you learn when you see how he reacted, that I happened to approach that one properly, and you go, okay, that went well. If I tried to, shrink and hide what I did, he would have been had a very different reaction. That wouldn't have gone over well. And so I was observant. I learned, but there were also people around that had very good reactions themselves. They clearly had, a lot more experience in life than I did, and that really helped me.
So a long time ago, one of my sysadmin mentors, who would do things like send me mail from God at on high to make me realize that SMTP was completely unauthenticated. It was completely that same academic, like, of course you're awesome, you're here, but I'm going to torture you anyway. But it used to be the lore that you weren't a real sysadmin until you had destroyed your first machine, or real networker till you brought the internet down. But the internet's much more critical now. I mean, was it easier to learn by breaking things? And how do we give people that, how do we help people when there's so much money and criticality flowing across networking now?
It is very, very difficult. It is very different in that way. At the time, not only would you break things with trying things out or whatever, but the technology wasn't stable either. So you're fighting both of those battles. And
how often
the level,
did you have code with your initials in it running on your routers?
Oh yeah, all the time. And you're on the phone, with the developers, and digging into register entries, going, okay, that doesn't look right, and you really don't get to do that anymore. One of the differences then versus now, the companies are way better at testing things. So what you get works better. But to your point, there's a lot of money in it, but things still break and things still don't work right all the time. And having a more complete view of how it all is supposed to work can definitely be beneficial. But to learn that is a lot harder. A lot of companies don't have big, massive labs to replicate this stuff. And how do you really replicate the size and scale and instability necessarily of the internet, right? And by instability, I mean just route churn. it's nothing broken or wrong. It's
Right.
just, I'm here, right?
Right.
Okay, good. I see you, right? But how do you do that in a lab in scale and allow people the opportunity to, try different things? It's difficult. And there's an element of fear rolling things out, and an element of fearlessness rolling things out. And honestly, different companies have different balances for that. I've been in the telco world where they want you to test something for 8-9 months, take 3 months to develop the rollout plan, and by the time your idea is actually hitting the network, the technology's moved 3 or 4 generations. But I've also been in companies where it's like, that's a good idea, let's give it a try tonight, right? And that balance of where do you land is dependent upon your culture, your customer base, and your talent pool, right?
Yeah.
But it's hard. That's a hard balance.
Yeah, we definitely see that. There are, I think there's a lot of evolution, because even people that come from a regulated world where they have to, they're required to do all this testing and all that, their application developers want to work in this very continuous way. So we sometimes get people saying, well, no, like before you deploy anything, you need to give us 3 months notice. And it's
Right.
like, that's not the way SaaS works. We're deploying every day. Or even the next scale. I remember when we were working with Yahoo, and it was like, well, every time you make a change, you can use, you can query the system and see whether anything broke before or after. And Igor's like, Avi, do you know how many changes we make a day? And I'm
Right.
like, he's like, think about per minute. Right?
Right.
I mean, obviously not mostly network, but deployments, rollouts, the speed of orchestration. So I guess, as you say, now there is one thing we didn't have, in the 90s and early noughties, which is commit, confirm, and rollback.
Oh yeah.
Which helps a lot. For those that don't know, the way you used to try to avoid what Hank experienced was you would tell the router reboot in 15 minutes, and then you would make the change. And then if you locked yourself out, the router would reboot, which wasn't good, but it might be better than
it gave you a chance, right?
And then you had to remember to cancel that, because the other problem is it took 15 minutes for it to reboot, as it propagated everything at serial speed through the device.
But the other thing, we had some failure modes where one router would reboot and it would have enough routing announcements through it that would make the next router fall over. So the way you would end up solving that is you'd reboot at this time for the whole section of your network.
Well, before,
those days are behind us. Thank
your
goodness.
time at AboveNet and my time at AboveNet, we had the route redistribution incident, which is, I describe it to mathematicians as a distributed computation that never converges, which is basically
that's a good way to describe it.
That's why you need good out of band. So you were at Unet, Digex, AboveNet, did a lot of consulting. Now at Cogent. I'll take you on a trip down memory lane. If you think about what were the biggest links that you ran at each company, and then we'll bring you forward to Cogent.
Ooh.
Roughly.
Well, let's see. UUNet. I left UUNet when it was probably OC3s at the time.
Yeah.
Probably about that.
Yeah.
Sprint was kind of a fun tenure. That was OC12s.
Okay, so we're still under gigabit. We're still under 1 gigabit for those following.
We might have had we might add OC48s then too.
Okay.
And then you're starting to move up the ladder after that. Yeah. It went kind of quickly after that.
10 gig and
as you moved away from the point-to-point link into your Ethernet, based. It went quick.
Yeah, well, that was a
Quickly
great
at that point.
decision that I really, it created some trauma in my time at AboveNet. I mean, but granted, when I came to AboveNet, there was one big broadcast LAN. And so people, and bandwidth was expensive enough that people were like, why do I get 10 megabits of broadcast? And why are you billing me $500 a month for that?
Right.
So we had to fix that. But the purity of, we don't do, serial connections. We only do Ethernet. Well, Ethernet serial, but we don't do, OCAT, whatever. The customer terminates in colo, connects Ethernet. The purity of all Ethernet to customer, was definitely nice. And
it simplified so much. It's simplified. Right. I mean, and kind of how I run Cogent is we keep it simple. It is a very clean design,
Well, I respect that. I've asked you for interesting ideas a couple of times, and well, it's not just you. It comes from Dave, right? Focus.
Oh yeah.
This is what we do.
Yeah, our whole business model is focused. We don't have any of the TDM services. We don't have any of this things. He says no to a lot of product ideas, business ideas, because it diverges from what we're good at. What we're good at is taking a packet and delivering it where it's supposed to go.
Yeah.
And really, if you ask us to do anything other than that, that's, we will struggle with anything other than that. But that we will do extremely well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I just plugged physically my first 100 gig in, and there was a lot less drama than I thought. And I was just thinking about, this is more bandwidth than, it was like when I was looking, I don't know, probably 8 years ago at a 100 meg card, 48 by 100 and a Catalyst. And I'm like, oh, that's the T1 board. And I was like, wait, that's actually a lot more. Each port is a lot more than a T1, but what is small and what is big, changes over time. So
that's right. We're getting, you get your pizza boxes now that the lowest speed you can get on it is 10 gig.
Yeah.
Like, okay, in a multi-tenant office building, still most people want gig E. Okay, so that means I need something else, right? And you think about that, that's a lot of bandwidth.
It's actually interesting, and maybe something we could have a panel on at some point, how hard it still is for devices to do a great job of, how much easier it is in networking to limit the physical port than it is to rate limit and traffic shape. Like, it works.
Oh yeah.
But there's just something about the physical limit which works a lot better.
It works a lot better. I think things are more expectant of that in the coding and in the the drivers and everything else. And so it's just more baked. It's better.
Yeah. I mean, even in the Kintic world, the devices do a great job of resampling. And so people could like, oh, can we send you one record per packet? It's like, well, you could. I don't think you want to.
Right.
And generally, things do an okay job. So Cogent, what can you tell us publicly about the scale, size, diversity, countries, buildings, of Cogent?
Adding new countries as fast as we can, as fast as regulation in the country allows, and we can.
You have like 10 countries, 100 countries. Like, how distributed is the network?
So Dave will give you the full number rundowns. We're on every continent. We are in hundreds. And it's huge. We run. It depends how you count. I think Dave tends to use the number 20% of all internet traffic on our network, and it's huge. It's every continent. So
yes.
Right.
And so, how many people? You asked the enable question, right? But how many people with enough access that they could?
So we run like an old school ISP, in that if you're a customer and you pick up the phone and you call in, the person that answers that phone has access to solve your problem, and training and everything. So our call center folks, our CST folks, they all have access to make
To the
configuration
backbone
changes
or to the customer attached?
to both.
Okay.
To both if they need it. Cogent runs. So that's a good question that you asked, because Cogent runs a rather flat network. We do not have we're not a telco mindset that has a pure backbone edge division. It doesn't make sense to do that all the time. It doesn't make economic sense to do that all the time. It doesn't even make traffic flow sense to do that all the time. So if you're trying to build, the way it does make sense is potential device management, like what you're talking about.
Right.
So we have really good internal training. We have developed that over the years. We also do keep track of the mistakes that get made and how to correct them and address it and that sort of thing to continue to refine that. That is a weekly process for us. But no, you call in, the person that answers it can solve that problem. They have they have access to do it.
I mean, it is like a SaaS company in some ways. You call it old school, but in a typical SaaS company, any developer can deploy. Now, we trust their wisdom not to do it without testing and not to do it when no one's around. And
right. So the thing with Cogent is, because we don't offer all these different flavors of whatever the customer wants, it is very standardized. So a customer configuration looks identical across the board. That makes it easier on the call center folks and the NOC and my engineers to figure out what's going on, right? Check to make sure it conforms to the standard. Yes, no, okay. If yes, well, then we know how it's going to behave, how it should behave.
Right.
So now you're looking at what would cause it to not behave that way, right? Is there an outage? Are there errors on interfaces? Are there, is there something else odd going on? Is there a bug, right? And go from there.
Which we talk about the bad old days, but networking, you still do need to know what it should be doing, because you can find and do find bugs more than in the kernel layer. So
I preach keep it simple. It is from Dave's point down, but it's also kind of the way I just view engineering in general.
So how many vendors do you run?
We have a ton of vendors. It's one.
So you have one IGP?
We have one IGP. We have one vendor, both for the optical layer and for the routed layer. Yes, so we have our one great vendor, and that allows us to have very deep ties within their business units, within their development teams. So when we do find problems, getting the right person on the phone is quick, is painless, essentially. Other than that you're doing it because there's a problem, right? But when you have multiple vendors, you don't have as much influence with that one vendor, right? With each vendor than if you had it all aggregated into one, and so there are pros and cons to the different approaches.
Well, and there's some protocols that do better with code diversity, like DNS. There's some protocols that don't always do better with code diversity, like BGP.
Like BGP or ISIS or something like that, right? Right. In the networking world, people will argue that dual vendors, dual routers gives you that redundancy. I would argue that the only way that gives you redundancy really is if you build two complete networks that might interact and talk to each other back and forth, but you still have to have a path that's all one vendor and a path that's all the other vendor. Because if you have an interaction bug, if you have a bug in one vendor
Mhm.
that's tripping up some data flow, whether it's packet
Right.
based, whether it's routed based. Um, and you go through that vendor for from customer to server or whatever they're
Mhm.
talking to, they're going to hit it. So the
Yeah.
only way you really mitigate that is to not that you be able to switch. Don't use this vendor anymore.
Right. I mean, I think
Other,
that, yeah, the world has been better generally. I see the point.
yeah,
The internet was brought down multiple times in the 90s and noughts by, again, the BGP, where, you
yeah.
know, in theory, in networking, we have these things called RFCs, and people look at them to write the code. In practice, that's something that has often, when I talk to academic folks looking at simulation and modeling, or network S&M, you know, it's like, you know, that the actual code has bugs and does not do exactly what the RFCs
But
say.
even those that do, the RFCs will state shoulds and mays.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
if I read a should and a may, and I decide to not do, and you decide to do, we can have a conflict that
Yeah.
can cause an outage.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you think about, I know you said you don't have like backbone or not, but
Right.
there must be more than, you know, Aaron, who we see on the peering circuit, doing it, you know, from the people that think IGP and, you know, picking your, I guess we didn't talk about testing, but testing devices and overall architecture. How big are the various teams, I guess, at Cogent, I would say?
So on the routing side of the house, it's in the ballpark of 8 people.
Wow.
It is on the optical side, it's a similar size for the optics.
Yep.
We have, you know, very good support groups around us that do other aspects, but it's a small group. It's a
And
small group.
so
They're
you
the
think
ones.
that
Yeah.
focus of design, focus of vendor, focus of product is the key to doing that.
It absolutely is. We do not, you know, we get requests. I want to tweak, you know, my configuration, and we say no to most of those.
I want this ACL this way.
Yeah, if I don't have a way to tool it, to write a script that will make it repeatable, and if I don't have a way that even with that I can predict how it's going to interact, I can't. We say no. Most of the requests that we get, in all honesty, are better done on the customer side anyway. They just find it easier. You know, well, I don't have to pay my consultant or whatever to do it. It's
Maybe
easier
someone
if you
should
do it
start
for
a
me.
firewall management company that just takes the Cogent leads,
Right.
and does customer.
And you know, the other requests that we get, short of, you know, sort of these tweaks like that, are things like the ACLs, where you're like, okay, this will not prevent
What
a
you
DOS
think?
attackers. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. I've got to carry a DOS attack all the way across my network to this port, and I will block it on this port. And you think that's a good thing. Well, I think that's a bad thing. And I would rather come up with ways to block the DOS attack and not carry it across my network.
Yeah, I know back in
yeah.
2014, we talked about whether providers could cooperate to say, hey, I'm going to filter this, maybe you shouldn't send it to me. But of course, we've had issues operationally with FlowSpec, and then of course people do want to get billed. People don't really want to generate DDoS, but they do want to get billed for traffic that is sent to them. So there's some complexities there. But
well, and the different hardware and vendors can treat some of this stuff differently. If I do FlowSpec and I put out an ACL rule, when does that ACL take effect? Does it take effect before or after I count the packet?
Yep.
If you're a usage-based billing customer, right? Well, that can vary depending upon your vendor.
Yep.
You know, so no, I wanted you to block it. You didn't carry that for me, so I don't want to pay for it. But I still acted on it. So should you? It's a good question, right? You know?
Yeah, no, it's funny how things can often not be as simple as they seem in the
right. It seems like an easy request, but you get into some, you know.
Yeah. Well, and again, there's people that will help customers that either lack the resources or sometimes sophistication to sell on top. And a lot of your competitors would sell a DDoS service and mitigation service, and the Chinese vendors would sell a DDoS service. Most of my customers would sell a DDoS mitigation service, but
Right.
used to be your Eastern European
Right.
demand gen for the DDoS folks, but now it's
Right.
all global. We'll just say.
Right.
So
Right.
um,
It's spread its wings.
so
Yeah, I would rather sell connectivity to those vendors.
right.
I carry bits really well, right? That's what we specialize in. Our design is very thorough in terms of completeness of value sets. You know, how you learn routes, what you do with them, how you tag them. Our design and our design is very predictable.
I think
So
that
I know how it's going to behave. There are fiber cuts, many times every day globally. So you need to have predictability.
is the network down? The answer is yes, somewhere.
Always, yes, yes,
Right.
yes. But I will still get your packet to where you want it to go.
Even
right?
on the DDoS front, a lot of people, we will work with them, and they have normally 5 gigabits of traffic, maybe 5 years ago, or 20 gigabits or 50 gigabits now, and they get an attack every so often that's 5 or 10 gigabits. It's like, you could get a couple hundred gigabits of capacity at the same Equinix place you're at. Not that you don't want scrubbers and cloud solutions, but
Right.
if you don't need to just run, so tight for the costs you're looking at, you can have many multi-layer, right? You can have more bandwidth. You can do flow spec yourself. You can engage. You can have on-prem scrubbing. You can do cloud scrubbing.
Right.
And again, some people not worth it. They're just going to do an always-on solution or something. Which is fine. A lot of diversity.
And to your point, part of Cogent's business philosophy is we want to commoditize internet service. So we want to make it, and by that means you have to be bringing the price down, period, right? And so we focus heavily on that. The flip of that is that means that you should be able to buy whatever bandwidth you need and not worry about these caps, right? Have extra, buy more. If you use it, great. If you don't, that's okay too. But in the DDoS world, there are different kinds. There's ones I want to take you out, and I'm just going to send you as much as I can, and they can send a lot of traffic.
Yes.
But there's also now, and has been for a while, as you know, these little microbursts of I'm going to send you a huge amount of traffic for 15 seconds, right? And your mitigation systems, have to be able to respond really fast for that, right? So the only way really to handle some of that is with extra bandwidth.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and capacity, and a lot of our more SaaS customers are likely to fire up cloud resource, change DNS, fire up more application layer. It's not just only about network.
That's right. Yeah. It's got to work end to end.
Yeah. So no, that's interesting. So I applaud the focus, even when it's frustrating to me personally, because I'd love you all to do something else.
Right.
But it is, if you look at startup canon, that is, the mantra is focus, focus, focus. If you go too wide, it can be difficult, especially at smaller scale. And I guess,
well, if you think about your background and mine and where we've worked, they've either, so many of them, UUNet bankrupt, Sprint has plodded along, not gone bankrupt, Digex bankrupt, AboveNet bankrupt, right? And one of the big reasons is they spent too much money trying to solve all of these problems or address all of these customer marketplaces, right?
Yeah,
Cogent's profitable.
The company that bought my ISP bankrupt, bought by another company that went bankrupt. Right. Akamai, has focus.
Akamai has focus. Yes.
So, and is still
Tentic
around.
has focus.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Cogent has focus, and Cogent, is profitable. So
I would get yelled
it's
at if we were profitable at this point. So we actually last year had months where we were, and I got yelled at. So, I'm a bad CEO, lose more money, grow faster. So
I'm happy to take more.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but you want to know that the business can be, and you want to keep that in control. And that is, it's ultimately up to every company and investors. It's like a lot of people in Silicon Valley would say, oh, that's a lifestyle company. It's like, well, it's their company. That's whatever they want it to be is the right thing. It's their company. It's not my company. You asked my opinion, I'll give you my opinion, but I worked at Server Central, which is an awesome lifestyle company, and Jordan and Daniel and crew, now Deft, they're happy doing what they're doing, and then there's Data Foundry, just had a great exit. The Yakubitis, the greater Yakubitis co-prosperity sphere, TexasNet, Giga News, Golden Frog, Data Foundry, and they did their thing, and have a lot of great people working for them. So last thoughts on the I guess the backbone side. What's the same and what's different besides speeds and feeds, from Digex, well, UUNet backbone, Digex Sprint, forward to now?
So the underlying architectures are really still the same. Your routing architectures, your even your trunking, even though it's different interfaces, it's bigger, faster, and whatnot.
Right.
That's all still the same. You still have the same issues with the hardware and the vendors and dealing with that and their designs, and how much queuing and tool sets you can do on it. So from a purely technical perspective at that level, I mean, there are tweaks, it's growth, but it is still underlying the same. The differences and there's some pros and cons in some of the differences. The differences is what you get is way better tested, way better quality, so that you have less of these catastrophic bugs or interactions or surprises. That said, because it's a very complex setup in terms of your routers and the software and everything, you have fewer of the people, and some of them have retired and whatnot, moved on, that understand the full thing of how it works. So you have a bug in your router, and you're dealing with someone who goes, well, my world's fine. And another person who goes, well, my world's fine. And in my world, I have one vendor, so I'm the one bridging all of these different people together, saying, okay, now your world may look fine, your world may look fine, but this is not working, so we need to look deeper, right? And that is challenging. I also find that true on the networking side. I've got a small team of extremely experienced people. But when you want to bring new people in, you're bringing people in that, oh, I got my CCIE and I know this bit of networking, and oh, I know this. And one of the things that I always ask, I run the department, so I tend to just look for personality fit and let the technical vetting go elsewhere. But I ask one technical question. You open up your browser and you type www.google.com. What happens?
Yeah.
I want to hear how they think about it. I want to hear whether they think about, the DNS resolution and how that process works. And, I just want to hear how they think about it. There's no right or wrong answer, really. I'm trying to see, do they have more than just, I can configure a router?
Yeah. I used to ask people, draw the internet, and it's a subset of that, but it's like, and again, that's not only a technical question, right? If you're selling internet, maybe you should, or a CDN, maybe I should know where you're starting from. And I have a friend that worked at my wife's best friend, but a friend of mine too, worked at DEC, on some very technical stuff, like the thing that did the runtime running VAX binaries on alpha, for Ultrix and
Yeah.
VMS.
Yes.
And when I heard what he did, I was like, oh my God, that's like so amazing. And he's like, yeah, we just ask people to like, compute polynomial and factorial and stuff. If they can't do the basic stuff fast, then that's the biggest predictor. And master's degree is the biggest anti-predictor. And the other networking question, which is really insightful, is like just two machines on a network when they find each other, and just understanding ARP and switches for ARP and routers versus passive observation and CAM and switches is subtle, and can be subtle, especially if you didn't really get that in your head through debugging. So how do you well, we'll come back to getting people at the end in a couple questions. I've got a question about like getting people into it, because that's, as you said, like there's a world of complexity.
There is.
There. So I notice we both took a parallel path into policy. I was asked when the ARIN Advisory Council was formed. I describe ARIN as the printing press for integers in North America. IP addresses and ASs. And I made it a couple of years, and I saw you had a detour there. And I marvel at these messages that make it through my whitelist from John Curran, where I see all these things going on, and ran BBN, and now he's helping the community. I mean, what was that like? Why did you decide, how do you think engineering versus policy stuff? Because they both involve people, right?
They both involve people. They both impact what we do. And I think it's important to be involved. I think it's important to do what you can. But I also think, priorities can take you in different directions, which is, sort of the, I was at ARIN for a little bit. I've been on, NANOG program committees and things like that. And so I like helping and I like reviewing, but also there's only so much time I can devote to that isn't my paying day job. So, but I found that the policy side is much more people oriented, less technical knowledge based. Helps to have a technical background with it, because you're trying to make policy that works around or with the technology that you've got. Sometimes around, right? But mostly it's people. It's interacting with people. It's getting consensus. It's figuring out how to listen. I think listening's a skill that I wish they taught in school.
Yeah, especially with again, a lot of smart people that are passionate about their viewpoint. It can be interesting. For me, there was enough talking about how to talk about things that my ADD kicked in, and I was just like twitching to write code. And Alec Peterson was actually, Avi, maybe this is not for you. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And I'm so happy that people enjoy that, and they do the ITF and they do ISOC and all that. But it is a great reason to go travel and see people that we know, but there's other ways to do that.
It is, but there's other ways to do that. I think that the interpersonal relationships are I mean, that I wouldn't be here without them. I don't think you'd be where you are without them. They are, you can't emphasize their importance enough, but if you prioritize that, there are a lot of ways to do it. And like you, I found, doing the policy useful to help the community, to help grow this industry. But it's also not, I would not want that to be my career.
As I said, John, you could probably guilt me or pay me enough to do John's job if someone needed to, but it would not be what I would want to do.
I would do a stint at it, yeah, but I don't think I could do it as well as he does, and for
Right.
as long as he does.
I wouldn't try to be an
right?
icon despite my frustrations with them. I just decide to, ignore it. So
We run one of the routes, so I'm part of that bit of the community
Mhm.
there. But I also have help there with Paul Vixie and my
Well,
server team.
someone who ran ICANN for a while that I had worked with wanted we had lunch or something, and it's like they're recruiting me to want to run ICANN, and I was just like, no, like I just can't. I have no,
Right.
like I would never do that. Like
Right.
people are always going to be unhappy. There's nothing that you could do that will
Right.
make people happy, and
Right.
I also didn't really agree, with the clear direction they were going,
Yeah.
in terms of
Yeah.
domains and stuff. But so bringing all that together, you talked about the complexity of modern networking and stacks, and we talked about the primordial ooze of nerd, where you might have to write a device driver, you are a sysadmin,
Yeah.
you might help
Yeah.
a confused professor do the networking. Everything was related, and in networking, um, I've been, I guess, privileged enough to see iOS back when it was one program.
Yeah.
BGP was like calling
Yeah.
ARP, and ARP was calling. I mean,
Right.
it was is in the bad old days.
Right.
And so, how do we bring people in to the community, or how do you, because we can't mint people fully formed that have already broken the internet and destroyed things
No,
and know
and
everything.
it is a good question, and it is. I think that you have companies like mine, Cogent. We love to take people that have like maybe a little bit of computer science or computer networking or something at a community college and bring them in and train them. And we've developed some pretty rich training. And then once they get in and they get their feet under them and they figure it out, they can decide, what's best for them on what path to go into. They want to learn more of the the DNS side of the world, or the routing side of the world, or the optics side of the world, and all of that. Or is it not right for them? I mean, they get to
There's
decide
people
it.
that
But
love supporting customers, and that's their
we
career.
have yes, we have some that's you can kind of see it. They're going to do that for the next however long they want to, and that's what they're really good at. I think that type of, as a community, we need to recognize and do more of that. The colleges have some good programs, but they tend to want to specialize, and they want to specialize in programming, or in networking, or in the various different components. And if you specialize too early in a component, you don't understand how it all works together, and you could develop the greatest video processor that doesn't have the buffering right to understand that between you and the server
Right.
and the customer out in the world, is has latency to it, and jitter, and
Right.
everything else, right? So I mean, I've seen that repeat itself over and over again. So I'm saying that from history and
Yeah.
experience, not just theoretical. And I think that general, it's kind of like, if you want to be a doctor, you become a doctor, then you specialize.
Mhm.
Right? And you go to more school for your
Right.
We need to recognize that there's an element of this as we evolve that requires some of that. And I feel like, at least right now in our evolution, we're trying to specialize people too early, that we're not getting that
Mhm.
diverse view. I
Yeah,
mean,
and I
some of the
think,
best engineers that I've worked with and that I have no computer experience prior to this industry.
huh,
They're just bright. Maybe they do AV stuff at their and figure out how all that works. Well,
mhm.
that's a network. It's
Yeah.
not an IP packet network, but a signal that goes from there to there is Not
Well,
that
it's funny
different than,
because we talk about network observability, but that was that's where it came from, right? Which is
yeah,
understanding an electrical network by observing its outputs and
right,
understanding what's going on. Yeah, it's a lot of the
right,
same
right.
processes. I mean, we have all these labs and testing and virtual things. You know, a lot of it is build this. One of the things that I don't have a CCIE, and we both come from the world where there was a
I don't,
ton of different protocols, and people would ask me questions, and it's like, "What's your CCIE number?" It's like, I don't have one. Like, I've never done IPX. Like, I have done IPX, but I don't know. You know, I just
yeah,
like hack it till it stops barfing on my IP network or whatever.
right,
Or I did. But one of the things I always liked about CCIE was like the lab. I'm going to give you a bunch of broken stuff. I broke this, and you need to
yes.
figure it out. That
Go fix it.
debugging
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
and how do we do that? And up and down and across layers, and yeah, have that broad interest. So it's not just I want to be a WAN engineer or I want to do this
right.
or that. I hope the maker, I was really encouraged 10, 15 years ago when the maker stuff started,
That, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
because it takes people down a level. It can be really hard, to be fair. If you live in this world of all the beautiful UIs and abstraction and everything just works, to start poking at it, can be tricky. Although we do have, shells on OS X now, so that's at least positive. And Linux running on Windows. Who would
And
have thought
Linux
that,
running,
right?
yeah, right, exactly, exactly. It's kind of converged in a lot of ways in that way. But
Yeah.
also, a lot of the younger people I know. I mean, I have a 12, almost 13-year-old daughter and her friend group and that sort of thing. They like that it all works, and they like that it's all easy, and they like that I can go in and fix it when it doesn't.
Mhm.
I'm struggling to get them interested in understanding what's going on and
I
why
have a
and
lot of
how, because
friends
yeah,
that are foundational builders, relatives, that got me into computers, that their kids of all genders are sort of the same thing. And
yeah,
their attitude, I mean, just people I tend to hang out with, is whatever they want to do and be. They're not trying to make them be like they wouldn't make them a doctor or a lawyer, or
right,
whatever.
right.
Yeah, so they'll come from somewhere
I know,
globally,
right, right,
globally. I mean,
right,
but it's different than the hobbyist era.
right.
So okay, we'll put
Yeah,
a
and
put a note
effectively
on that
that
and think about that.
I was going to say, effectively that's what we've done in our sort of generation, for
Right.
lack of a better term,
Yeah.
is we were hobbyists, and it grew into a career. It wasn't really a plan.
Which is
And now, if you want to plan, which is where I
right.
guess the industry is now, you need to entice people. You need to figure out how to make
Well,
it
it's not
interesting
just
to them.
networking. There's a lot of, you talked about medicine, tribal
Yeah,
knowledge. There's a lot of professions where we're actually not as far from woodworkers and shoemakers and
yeah,
the artisans as we could or should be, despite Wikipedia, despite all this information.
right.
And networking is one of those areas that need to
Yeah,
think about.
yeah. Networking is still part art, part science, and
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely, that's right.
Yes. No, I mean, it's
Yeah,
it's it's definitely true. Networking, distributed systems, there are people
yeah,
that lay hands on that couldn't necessarily explain exactly. They could probably reverse engineer it, but there's a lot of pattern match. And think, well, how did you know that? Um, I
right.
looked at the graphs and just seemed like, but you do anything
Yeah,
long enough. But again, medicine, it's a
right.
struggle for me to find doctors that will say I don't know, which is like awesome. I love hearing I don't know. It's like I
Yeah,
love hearing we don't know. We used to do this, now we do this. Tell me the probability space instead of just the go do this
right,
and see me in 3 months.
right,
But
right.
I'm a horrible patient, so
Well, I get asked networking, how did you know to do that? And to your point, I don't always have a concrete answer. I mean,
mhm,
sometimes, but most of
right,
the time I mean, there's still intuition, or,
yeah,
and relying on that, trusting the intuition, but also relying on sort of
yeah.
the history of what I've been
Mhm.
through. Right.
Well, as
Yeah.
Kentic grows, we'll definitely think about more of the training,
Hmm.
especially around internet working.
Yeah.
And we see it ourselves, in terms of a lot of people wanting to know about networking who come from software, and there definitely could be better resource. So we can't solve it alone, but hopefully as
No,
a community,
Happy to help. Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. We need it.
So last question.
Okay.
I think we've both been really fortunate to be able to make a career out of things that are fun.
Yeah.
But any advice you give younger self, on day one, can you make this thing print, or, a little further on?
I think I would love to have told myself early on to pay closer attention to the people around you earlier. I learned it, but earlier, to tap into their experience more, to tap into their brains and their personalities more, to see the pros and cons of different approaches more. I was fortunate to get in around some really good people, and I could have learned a lot more than I did earlier. I think I kind of learned that lesson as I went, and got better and better and better and better at it. It's funny, there are times I'll refer to myself at this point in my life as a social engineer, no longer a network engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Because my job is not necessarily to have my fingers on the routers anymore. It's to get everyone on board to go in the same direction, to support each other and work as a team, and all of that. So the earlier I learned that, the better life would have been. I think, and listening is a big aspect of that. I wish I was a better listener earlier.
Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting because I don't always do this. I could be better. We could all improve. In fact, starting Kentech has made me realize how much I suck at so many things, but it's awesome because I don't like being bored.
Right.
But, I think if you're doing a great job as a leader, people think, well, all you do is tell people what to do. I think it's actually much more listen, ask, and help, which also at the early stage, if you only ask and don't do or help, then that gets annoying.
Right. Yeah.
If you ask, looking for the answer that you want, and then you la 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 la, then that also.
Well,
but
that
if you
doesn't
do
work.
those things, that's generally.
I would add one more word in your circle: trust.
Mm-hmm.
You have to trust the people around you. You have to earn their trust that you're going to help. If you just listen and don't do anything, that doesn't get you anywhere. But if you build that trust where they know that if they're going to share something, or answer your question, or challenge you, I don't know it all. I might be saying, let's do this, and it's a really horrible idea.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to trust that they can say to me, that's a really horrible idea. And then I'm going to accept that, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to think about it. I'm not going to just react all, how dare you, and all of that. I mean, I believe strongly in, taking the time to reflect. Try not to have that any, people can tell me that I'm wrong. I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
and they can do that politely or rudely, and I accept it. Right. But that's part of who I am. That's what I bring.
Mm-hmm.
But it is really important. And I think that helps earn the trust. They know they can, say and do anything, and I'm going to support them, and they're going to support me.
Or even as you described with Rick Adams a long time ago, right? You had the trust that you could share with him, and he, you establish his trust by sharing and being open. And then he's like, okay, and if he thought, okay, well, you screwed it up, you should have someone else check it, then he would have told you, and you should have, do it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, and that's, so I think I earned trust in his eyes. But his reaction taught me a lot about, about me trusting him as well. So, anything moving on, I don't even know if he would remember it. He probably wouldn't in his, world. But to me, it was a big deal. Very nervous early in this job. Yeah, it was a big deal. But I learned a lot about that respect and trust and honesty and how to approach things. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Mistakes aren't bad. It's how you handle it.
Right. Well,
That
or
can make it better.
experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted.
Right.
As you said, sometimes you need to, get yourself unconfused. Hopefully with as limited a blast radius as possible.
Yeah.
Which good architecture helps with, which we can have a debate about some other time. Well,
Yes.
Hank, thank you so much for sharing. And
Thanks,
it's been great to work with you and the people who are at and have come through Cogent. And maybe we'll, as a community, continue to work. We definitely will on trying to help people understand and get in to the community so that, well, we can keep zooming like this and the digital world will work and we won't drive off cliffs. Yes, we can't, just take people that started as hobbyists in the 80s. So that will not work. It needs to be a diverse set of people.
That'll run its course. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. No, there definitely are younger folks but we need to help, it's possible to get there, from the outside, but it needs to be a little bit more ordered and also tell the story better, which hopefully
I think telling the story a little more I think a little more community involvement in the labs and training and teaching. It shouldn't just be the vendors. It shouldn't just be university, which has different focuses, right? So
well, plus it's not actually a technology thing. Peering is not actually a technology thing alone, right? No. So the business and economics and politics and all that, but again, different topic, different time.
Right.
Well, thanks again.
I've been on both sides of that politics.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing is different companies in the course of their life, they go from the bad gal or guy to the wait, why won't people? It just shows that people tend to behave in the same patterns when they have the same inputs.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, thanks again, and I look forward to chatting with you soon.
You bet. Take care.